The Bring a Trailer Podcast.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Bring a Trailer Podcast. Alex Porter is my name. I am here at Bring a Trailer headquarters with Beck. Hey, buddy.
Hey, Alex. How you doing, buddy?
Always a pleasure to do this with you, man. You came up with an interesting subject for today that I'm excited to talk about. But before we do that, what's new with you? Any interesting car news in your life?
Still hunting for a new family hauler, but going to be stretching the legs of the Xterra this weekend, heading up to the mountains, doing some snow camping with the troop. And so actually getting to use like a purpose-built vehicle in its actual environment is just so enjoyable to like actually then get to express it. To daily drive a truck like that is just so depressing in the streets of San Francisco. So being able to take it out a little bit off-road, but mostly just in the snow and actually enjoy it. I'm so excited for that.
You're going to be in the snow proper.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Going up to a place called Hope Valley, which is a beautiful, very large, flat valley, kind of uncommon territory.
This is Sierras?
Sierras, yeah.
Okay.
The Sierra. Around 8,500.
Sorry, I didn't know that. It's supposed to be singular?
It's
the
singular.
Sierra.
It's the Sierra.
Okay. Yeah. I grew up right at the foot of them, and I've been using that term incorrectly for 40 years. So congratulations to me.
But yeah, we'll be going to Hope Valley, beautiful little sort of super flat. It's great for taking young people hiking in the snow. You don't have to do any kind of off-road driving.
Tent camping, or are you going to be in cabins?
Tent camping.
Okay.
In the past, we've attempted snow caves, and this will be an opportunity for that because we're getting a ton of snow over the next few days.
Right.
We need a lot of fresh snow. We can't have like melted and repacked. And with where the climate of that altitude has been going these days, it's getting to like the 40s every day. So everything like melts and then refreezes and then melts and refreezes. And I've been there before where we're trying to dig and it's just awful. So
it's like rock hard, right?
Yeah, and it's like layers of rock. And so when we're going this time, it'll be in theory good 2-3 feet of relatively fresh snow that should be making it a lot easier.
Sounds like fun, man. Is your Xterra supercharged?
Not supercharged. It's the Pro 4X.
Do you miss that up there? Would it be nice to have a blower on it?
It's actually got a
7,000 feet, something like that?
Yeah, 8,500 is what we'll
it's
be
high.
at.
Yeah,
it's pretty high up. It probably would be helpful, but at the same time, those things have great torque, that 4-liter V6.
And it's kind of a light truck.
It's a very light truck. It also feels, I think, pretty fast because it's such a short wheelbase. Like any kind of input on the steering wheel, and it just starts to flick around. It actually makes it not a good road trip truck at all.
Yeah, you've said it's kind of a squirrely drive.
It's not
a lot of
great
times,
for that. Yeah, it's not good for the freeway. We've done it a couple times, but it's pretty tough, sort of like relaxing while driving it. It's great for the city in that sense, but you feel silly driving around in the city. But taking it to the mountains, we've taken it to around 7,000 square feet further north in like the summer. And that's been great on gravel. Like it's just phenomenal for it. It's very confidence inspiring. But in the snow, it's something I'm really excited for to see what it does.
Great.
Yeah.
It's all-time all-wheel drive, or you have to switch into four-wheel?
Switch into four-wheel drive, center locking and rear locking, no front locking.
High and low?
High and low.
Great.
Yes.
Oh, man, fun. I'm jealous of that. I haven't been off-roading in a really long time, and I think it would be really fun in the snow. My kids we don't get up to the snow enough, so I'm jealous of that.
Well, I mean, it's not like it's an inexpensive thing to do. Thankfully, like snowshoeing is pretty much dirt cheap compared to skiing these days. I saw a great video that broke down how ski resorts, I didn't realize it's basically like a duopoly right now. I had no idea. There's basically two companies that own a ton of different resorts.
Really?
And they basically control the pricing, and they all want to go towards membership fees, like season passes.
Really?
And so they've essentially kept season passes to be relatively expensive, but then jack up day rates to incentivize everyone to go to season passes.
Wow.
It's a wild economy. It's something like skiing wasn't that popular throughout the 2000s. And then all of a sudden it's been like exploding right now.
But wait, what's the snowshoeing piece of this?
Oh, because we'll snowshoe to our campsite.
Oh, I see. Okay.
We're gonna park basically at a snowmobile parking lot, which is like the most obnoxious part of it. As much as I love snowmobiles, it's one of those things where like the second
never ridden one.
Never,
it's like I'd really like to. No, I'd really like to. I've never ridden a Sea-Doo either, like a jet ski Sea-Doo. I know.
Okay, so snowmobiles, super fun, obviously can be dangerous, which is why they're fun.
Yeah.
And but just like how
why don't they make a 3-wheel? Actually, they did make a 3-wheel. Aren't the original snowmobiles a single ski in the front?
Probably a single ski in the front.
That's what
probably.
I thought. Yeah, okay.
Mm-hmm. And so with the snowmobiles, it's kind of like if you're ever riding a bike in the city, all of a sudden you hate cars.
Yeah.
It's the same thing as like the second you're hiking around snowmobiles, you're like, oh, there's snowmobile people. But if they offered you one for like a hot second, you'd hop on.
And you'd become the animal that everyone hates, like buzz bombing the snowshoers.
Completely. And complain about, who are these snowshoers here? Get out of my way.
Oh man, you've unlocked one of the great conundrums of anybody on any mode of transportation. You hate all the other people
Correct.
in the alternative mode of transportation.
What's the joke? Everyone else is everyone going fast than you is a maniac, and everyone who's going slower than you is a jerk.
Yep.
But I've got around 30 scouts coming with us. I'll probably have about half a dozen adults, and we will park all our cars, put on our gear, put on our snowshoes, backpacks on, hike maybe only a mile and a half in. You move real slow in the snow.
Sure.
Especially with all that gear. So,
sure.
But we'll set up camp and be there for the night and then bug out first thing at dawn.
Fun.
Mm-hmm.
Man, I'm jealous of that. That's going to be great. And you're getting something done to the SC too, the 911, right?
Yeah. So I did a big engine build on it when I bought the car off my dad a long time ago now. And unfortunately, just funds wise, I couldn't really warrant wrapping up the sort of last bit of it, which was going to be basically backdating the exhaust. There's also issue, right? California, it's a 78 car. So 76 and newer needs to have visual and sniff test done on it. And so in order to pass that, I had to keep the old exhaust. That's got a secondary air injection system, which basically just pumps air on the backside of the exhaust valves. It does some burning of bad stuff, but really what it does is just preheats the catalytic converter faster. So it's working better at temp. The car is now going to be registered in a zip code or actually an area code of California that won't need that anymore.
That's how I do the 912E, same program.
However, there is a state bill that has come out trying to push that to, I believe, a 30 or 35 year, I forget which one it was, rolling calendar. So that basically any car that's 30 years or older will no longer have to do it.
That's great, which is how it was.
That's how it was. It was a 25-year rolling ban. It started
in 68 and it rolled up till 75 and then they stopped it.
It was Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yep. And 76, my car, the worst thing that could happen. And there's, I really would like a 77 308 GTB, as you know, and like that, those quad cars, that's never going to pass.
Never going to pass. Yep. And it was one of those things where like, if you just gave us like a pathway where you could even pay for it, it'd be fine because it's such a small
I'd buy the carbon offsets or whatever.
For sure.
Right? Yeah,
for sure. So, but my problem now actually is arguably I struggle to get it to pass smog, not because it can't pass, but because I've taken it to local smog shops in the city. They see the car and say no.
Correct.
They don't want to do it.
NSX, same problem for
Even
me.
That new?
Yeah, because they've put it on rollers. It's the same kind of thing. 91. Is it OBD2? It's around 2000 where you can just plug the car in.
Right.
The GT3, which is an 05, is just a plug-in.
So they don't even do, wow, I'm amazed by that because they still have roller
Last time I tried to take the NSX, I went to 2 different places and they were just like, nope.
Because they didn't have rollers? They didn't
want to do it. I think maybe one of them didn't have it and the other one had it, but they're like, no cars were on it. They're just like, I don't want to do this part of the job. Now I just have it. I think this is probably true with a lot of places that work on older cars, like the shop where I have it worked on. Just takes it to go get it smog for me,
exactly.
Right?
I go to high tech.
And then if there's a problem, like they also fix it. You know what I mean? They fix the problem.
And that's where it's going back to high tech in San Rafael. They're also a seller on BAT, and they did the engine build for me, and it's going to do a exhaust backdate.
Fantastic.
Basically, it's still going to have a heater box, not doing anything crazy. It's really just trying to make it how the engine was designed to run in the rest of the world. So.
And that's next week. That's soon, right?
Yeah, I was going to do it this week. And then with all this rain coming up, I didn't want to worry about moving the car during all this. It's a Targo and it's the original roof and it's never been redone. At least like the outer material has been redone, but it's never been refitted. So all the gaskets are original. And so you get a little bit of leakage, but like not a ton. And I just don't want to risk it. So I'll wait till next week.
Green car's done. I just got the call today. So I'm going to go pick up that car. I got to take the GT3 back so I can get more stuff done to it. It's good. You're not quite in this mode because you don't have the room that I do, but where one of your old cars always needs work. So you're swapping one for the other. You know what I mean?
Spot.
It's correct. The green 912E, they've been working on it for like a month. And my wife keeps going, when are you going to get the car back? I'm like, this is great. This is a free parking spot they can have as long as they want.
If you take that invoice and divide it amongst the number of days,
that's a month's parking spot.
Parking at SFO or parking at your mechanic shop?
Oh, SFO would be like, that's my point. The mechanic is great. Like if they want to deprioritize it, it's great. Anyway, excited to get that car back. And I think by the time this goes live, the NSX will be up too, which I'm excited about.
If you want to preview that at all.
I've been talking about it on and off on podcasts, but my personal 1991 NSX, a car I've owned for about 8 years now, is going to be live on the site. I believe they finished the photos this weekend. 911R, one of our top sellers who's famous for their photography, is selling the car for me, in part because I wanted those photographs. I can't wait to see the full gallery, but I showed you the preview.
Little behind the scenes photos there
behind the scenes, right, with seeing their rig and everything. And that's exactly what I wanted. You know, that desert morning dawn photo shoot that they're so famous for, because I thought that silver NSX would look really good, and it sure does.
So that behind the scenes photo running the white glove department is so good to see. And I wish that they posted behind the scenes photos in the galleries to give people some context because
Of what it takes.
what
right?
it takes,
Yeah.
because it's definitely happened where people have bought a car on BAT. They send me the listing from it. Maybe they bought it from 911R, or they see those photos and like, great, I want that. Like, oh, I don't think you understand
Yes.
what this is going
Correct.
to take. So it's pretty much impossible unless you're doing that kind of volume and you've got that skill set to set up that operation.
Or a full rig, which is
Mhm.
what the 911R photographer has. Josh, I don't think we're blowing up his spot by saying his name. I mean, that's a proprietary whole thing that he's set up, right?
I mean, it's been, what, 1,500 listings of practice alone?
Correct.
I saw his profile specifically. Not
the Image
911R,
Engine, what's his username? Isn't that
Image Engine,
Yeah,
yes. And the number of listings, I want to say it's around 1,500
Yep.
that he's done now. And so, yeah, that just takes time. I did notice that for Rob Dietz, his photos, he's been doing some where it's like the camera's further back
Mhm.
and you're seeing the white panels that you're bouncing light off of. I think it helps add some value to like, oh, wow, this is like a full studio
Yes.
operation. It does, I think, also help give people a little bit of understanding of like, you can't just like walk in with your
Correct.
iPhone into a studio and just make those kind of things happen. I like it. I know that for some perfectionists, some creators, showing process is actually the opposite of what you want is part of your branding. But transparency helps solve problems. It's a question of like whose problems you're trying to follow.
Totally. You and I, when we were in Arizona last month, we talked to Joey Cascio, who does these similar kinds of photo shoots out in the desert. He's located very close to 911R. And he was saying, I mean, he's got to have like special, what did he say? He has a special permit to like go to the right
Yes,
area.
yeah,
I mean, like
'cause
to shoot in a
Well, I think
nature preserve or something. I mean, the effort that goes into these top level photo galleries, you could speak to it much better than me, but it's incredible what people do.
it's also all about how legitimate you are. So, for example, when I was a photographer in my early years, I never got a permit for anything.
Sure.
I didn't have insurance. You just sort of run and gun and show in places.
Totally.
Right, the photojournalism aspect too. Like when I was actually on assignment, you don't ask for permission sometimes because you know people are going to say no. So you go for forgiveness. But eventually you get to the point in which you are so legitimate that there's actual, financial danger if you don't.
Especially if you're going back to the same photo location over and over again, right? You got to build a relationship there.
And you're not selling your buddy's E30 anymore.
Right.
You're selling a client's
Who's
300
paid
SL.
you in part for these photos.
Right.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
if something happens, you need to be insured, and the insurance company wants to have all their T's crossed and I's dotted. So you go and get some sort of commercial photography permit for these spaces and build that relationship. And if you've got a, efficient operation, I think what a lot of these galleries you're starting to see is photo galleries where there's maybe a dozen lead images, which is basically the car at that location with great light, with great vista view. Essentially the top 3 photos of the listing, right?
Yep.
Hero shot, and then a couple
exterior
of quarter panel,
inspirational shots. Yep.
and then the profile photo.
And then they're back in their kill
and then they're
room
right
studio.
back in the studio for all interior engine bay, all that kind of stuff.
School me on that a little bit, because it does seem like pretty much every one of our power sellers, once they get to a certain level, they invest in the space and cost, frankly, to build an indoor studio. And that's what? Lighting control, or what? To explain that to me.
Yeah, so some of it's going to just only be lighting control, because photographing the interior of a car when the car is outdoors is challenging.
Yeah. And you're also not pinned to, I think Matt said they woke up at like 4:30 a.m. to go get the best light, right? Like you don't want to do that forever if you can avoid it.
Correct. And imagine this, if you could take 2 cars. He may have had a second car there.
Somebody told us they have a person like running cars back and forth to this location when they do it.
You could go there, you could pump out 3-4 cars. If you get it all dialed in right, it doesn't take long to get that walk around shoot done, bring the cars back, and then you can spend all day or even nighttime, right? It doesn't have to worry about when the sun is rising, the sun is setting. And you can shoot all the interiors, which, like I mentioned before, it's very challenging because when you're shooting the car in outdoor space, the outside is brighter than the inside of the car, obviously. Whereas when you go into a studio space, you can reverse that. And now you can make your background really go away. You can't see it. You can essentially do detail work of the interior as well. And you're on your own clock. You're not on the clock of the weather or light and sunlight, that sort of thing. And so efficiency-wise, it is great.
Yeah.
Now, if you're doing one car, which is 99% of what White Glove does, is we're doing one car in random place USA. We need to sometimes parachuting a photographer.
Right.
We're not going to have studio access to those spaces.
Right.
You've got to be able to basically run and gun where you are. It's actually honestly a photojournalism style approach in that you are adapting to the space. Studio photography is very additive. You are starting from zero. It's a blank slate. You bring in your lighting, you bring in your shading, you bring in your reflections, all that stuff. In photojournalism or outdoor photography, it's all reductive. You're using shallow depth of field to make things go out of focus so you can't see them. You're moving your position so to get distracting items out of the background. You're choosing your own location. It's all about eliminating the distractions versus building up the image. And that is something that our photographers in White Glove have to be very good at. They're very good at adapting to those situations while also having great customer service. Whereas when you're working in a studio, it's a very different skill set. You don't have to worry about those things. You worry about very different things. Right?
But the ultimate car photographer has both, right? You kind of want both. Or like the ultimate BAT gallery takes elements from both.
Yeah, I would say your ultimate BAT gallery is always going to do two things. It's going to inspire. So you're going to see the car in its element, make you think, oh, I could go do this. I'm buying into an opportunity. But it also provides the inspection of an asset.
Right.
And that's the difficulty.
Close-ups and details. Close-ups and details and all that stuff. Yeah.
When it is in the kill room, it makes the car feel like an asset. Yep. And an asset, you can associate a dollar point to, whereas an opportunity, you can't.
Yep.
I was just at my kids' elementary school auction, and they're...
it's happening at our school too, buddy.
It's spring, buddy. Every public school, every private school, they're all doing their spring auctions.
Give the parents a couple glasses of wine and get them bidden. Just like BAT. It's no different than BAT in some ways.
There was no drink tickets at my spring auction this year.
Huge mistake.
Last year, it was open.
Oh, yeah.
That's Last year, you had to pay for it. This year, it was totally open. I was like, this is going to be a problem. And it was. But with the...
But that's foolish. Open bar pays for itself 10x completely. With bids on like the artwork that your
Find someone with the gold membership at Costco.
Yeah.
Get all your booze and then start, pulling at the heartstrings. They always play a video at the beginning. That got like the one kid in your class who can actually public speak, talking into the camera, and you're like, oh, God. Yeah. So they do this thing where it's all about the opportunities. They have to put a value on it because for tax purposes, you can only really write off whatever is above the actual value of the item. However, there's just many things on there that they would argue there is no value on it. And so they say it's priceless is what it literally says in the description of the item. And to help
it's like a MasterCard commercial, by
completely. So yeah, with those listings, having it do both, where it's both about the opportunity, but it's also a remote inspection. That's the 1-2 punch that you really need.
Really well said. You need both. I agree completely. Is that a good segue into talking about some of the more painful things that people say about cars?
I think it's a great segue because visuals is kind of the common denominator that nobody can get away from.
Right.
It doesn't matter if you are a traditional car seller where you use all the phrases that everyone's heard, or if you're out of left field, never sold a car before. But at the end of the day, you all have to have photos.
Yep.
And people expect that. And then when it comes down to verbiage, wordage, what are the tropes that we get into? That's kind of the dividing line. And that's sort of where we found some people struggle, and we have to help guide them into the BAT way of things.
Correct.
And so we were both this morning kind of venting to each other about some of the frustrations that we have and the negotiations we have, sometimes protecting people from themselves.
Correct.
As far as how do they describe their cars and how they present them. And it got us a little fired up.
It did. This has long been a point of passion for me at Bring a Trailer and for a lot of our staff, I would say too, where we say it all the time. So sometimes maybe these words don't ring true to people because we say them all the time and they're things a lot of companies say about themselves, but it really is built into the DNA of our staff ethos, which is transparency and honesty always wins the day. It's always better to say the car's got a problem. It's always better to be truthful about whether the odometer is accurate or not. It's always better to say, I don't know if you don't know, right? One. And it's really hard for people to do those things because, at least this is now I'm getting into my psychological read of car culture, because it's so ingrained in people to pump up their vehicle when they're trying to sell it, right? To say that it's 100% original paint. I know where the car was. I don't want to blow up all the phrases that I like the least, but there's many of them that we'll talk about here today. And I even feel it in myself sometimes. There's almost a pathological, built-in way that people talk about their cars because we're so used to it, right? When people are selling cars.
We're so used to it. You see it everywhere. It's pervasive. It's something that everyone's used to reading and hearing and seeing. And then also, honestly, I'll say it personally, it's a part of like masculinity of like knowing the answer.
Yeah.
You feel like that's who I'm supposed to be. Yes. I'm supposed to know the answer. And for a long time, I struggled with that. I remember coming out of college, I was trying to go into journalism of all places. And I was struggling with being confident with saying, I don't know.
Yeah.
And that's a really tough place to be coming from, especially if you're selling something.
Like, I get it. Your money is on the line, right? You are financially invested in this thing that you're selling on BAT. You want maximum money for that. And so the inclination is to say whatever people need to hear or whatever you think they need to hear. I guess that's the key, right? Because I think we would argue, don't actually puff it up. Don't actually exaggerate. You're more likely to get somebody to pay you top dollar for something on the internet, sight unseen, if you're like as truthful as you can be, like radical transparency.
Yeah. And that comes back to my phrase that I use for my sellers all the time is humility and positivity.
Yeah.
Because you don't know what you don't know. And that's an important thing to get across to the buyers.
Although sometimes you know something and are unwilling to
share it. But like, it's one of those things where it's short-term gains versus long-term gains.
Yeah.
And post-auction, you're going to be better off if you don't have an issue, because in auction, you were honest about the fact that you don't know something.
Yep.
Saying I don't know or we don't know is great. I usually also work with my sellers on how they contextualize that, because text is not great context.
Yeah.
Right? It's just a flow. They can't see who you are. They can't see your face. They can't see how you're gesturing when you say it. They don't know that you rewrote it 20 times before you posted it, or that you posted it just scribbled on your phone in the middle of the night. And so you've got to come from it from a sense of humility, positivity, because a lot of people will assume the worst. There's a great Key and Peele sketch where the two comedians are texting each other and they're both interpreting the texts completely differently.
Right.
Like one guy is saying like, I'll see you later tonight. He goes, I'll see you later tonight. Oh my God, who says that? Just awful.
Totally.
And they go back and forth. And that's the same thing happens here. I talk with sellers who read a comment and I get a text or a call and they're like, this person's blowing up my auction. And when I look back at it, the person was just asking a question.
Right.
They don't know.
Yeah.
But same thing with my seller. They also don't know.
Right.
And helping them,
which can be scary.
Be very scary. Which I think is one of the reasons why people do what you're doing with the NSX, which is you're handing the car off to somebody else who's a professional at this and knows how to handle that space. And there's a value add to that, which is why they charge commission. And there's an important help for that. And we provide that opportunity too through the local partnership program. If you need that assistance as well.
Yes. I don't need Matt Crandall to answer my questions though. I can answer questions about the NSX. I know about that car. And in fact, I want the listing to be super, I want to practice what I preach. I want it to be as honest as it can be, and don't want it to include any of the terrible phraseology that we're so used to that triggers us. I thought we could, as a fun thing, run through some of those painful ones. Do you maybe want to set this whole conversation up before we do that, of the situation that we were talking about this morning, though? Because I think it's interesting. We don't have to name names or anything, but I think it would be helpful for this discussion to have an example of how this can all go down.
Sure. This is a classic situation, pretty much.
And this has probably happened to us hundreds of times.
Many, many times in white glove as well.
And this one surrounds original paint, which we could have a whole podcast just on original paint. We think that phrase is stupid, kind of, frankly. And probably a lot of people will be like, that's crazy. But original paint it's kind of a meaningless phrase, right? A lot of people don't really know whether paint is original or not. And people are really, this is what we got hot and bothered about this morning. People really care about it a lot. And it's kind of hard to prove it.
Well, I think its value comes from the idea that we're afraid of a car's history that we don't know.
Correct.
And so we put a value of, if it's considered original paint, that means there's less likelihood of stories associated with the car, whether it's had damage or whatever. And we're always constantly trying to slice the cars to differentiate them more and more. And so we say, well, it's original paint or mostly original paint, which is even worse.
Right. Great.
Or 95%.
Oh my God. Yeah, let's quantify it. It's 94.3% original paint.
By weight, not by surface area. So the...
do we have a whole sidebar on paint meters? Okay, sorry. Go ahead. Back.
So paint meters is what came up, was one thing that we include in our white glove photo shoots whenever we can. Photographer's equipped, and if it matters for the car, right? It doesn't matter for all cars, but this was a late model sports car that's on the site right now. And paint meter readings in one section, the rear quarter, were a little bit thicker than the rest of the car. And what obviously didn't really help was that the seller had gone in the comments and said, this car is original paint.
Right. Which he may have believed.
Which he may have believed. And he genuinely seemed like he did. He bought it from a premier, I'm talking a well-known...
Who claimed it was original paint. This premier seller,
Or at least that's what he believed he had heard.
Maybe that seller also you didn't know, right?
Or maybe they did tell him and he had selective hearing, or he misremembered, or he was choosing to believe certain things. Who knows? Either
Which
way,
happens a lot. People, I think through no malicious intent, want to believe the best of the car, particularly at the moment that they're selling it. They want to believe the best of it.
Well, they've identified with the car.
Yes.
Right? They chose this car to help express themselves.
Yes.
And so for them to not know everything about it or to put a blemish on the car, that hurts them. But they don't have as much experience with a lot of cars. Or if they've had, in this example, bought the car at kind of the height of the market.
Right.
From a premier place, probably overspent, but now they're looking to move on. And so we put the photos out there, just let people review them and discuss them. And he was very concerned about some of the comments about the paint meter readings. And so then he's like, what should we do? What do we do about this situation? And so we decided, well, we need to get a lot more readings. There's only about like 12 on the car, which sounds like a lot. But if you think about, if you do
they
a
could
reading,
do 100 just on this was the rear quarter, as I recall, right? So
if you do a paint meter reading per square foot, you're talking 80 to 100 for a small car, right? And even then, you might be missing stuff.
Right.
And so there has to be a point where you call it. And this is just what we're going to measure. I also think while it's very convenient to go through photos, I actually really like, I've had some dealers who do a paint meter reading video.
Yes.
It takes longer. And
some of them also do a printout where they show, like they have a picture of the car and it shows the readings.
Sure.
Like that's like a compilation thing too. That's another way to do it.
That's a good one, because I think the problem is there's no sort of situational awareness. When you're just looking at a panel and a meter on it, you're like, I don't know what I'm looking at
through
here.
100 paint meter, it's like
it's not
beating
helpful.
your head against a wall. Yeah,
you kind of have to have some context of that.
Right.
And so if you were doing the video or multiple video, like we're just going to do this door right now. I know it's more effort. It seems kind of pedantic, but if your goal is to establish evidence, you're trying to make a claim, but really you're just providing evidence, which is what every BAT auction is just evidence of what the car is in its current state. That's where the video of paint meter readings come in. Well, we got those 80 readings, definitely shows thicker paint on the right rear quarter. And I advised the seller to go back to the dealer who he had bought it from, say, hey, why don't you try and reach out to them, see if maybe they'll comment on the action. I don't think the comment's going to come out, but they did confirm to him that they have since decided that there was in fact
and now the argument becomes what caused the paint work?
Right. Why did they do this? What caused it? What was the damage? All this kind of stuff. And then, of course, right off the bat, more assumptions. Well, I know for certain it wasn't an accident.
Couldn't have been an accident. Yeah.
I mean,
it's like
up until 24 hours ago, you didn't think there had been any paint work. And so this is the conundrum people get themselves into, is they believe
and
they have to make
you start getting
claims.
Defensive and everyone's upset now. And oh my God.
All the things could have happened. And what matters is just what the car is now. And in this case, there's a reserve price, which is great because it will protect the seller if they decide, you know what, I'd rather keep it or I'd rather do more work on it or whatever it is. Great.
Now you need to delete the auction because I don't want anyone to know.
That's something that I do discuss with sellers a lot of the time. Like they want way more than what I think the reserve should need to be as part of that discussion. I explain, Bring a Trailer is the most public place to list your car. That record's going to be out there. So even if your reserve protects you, if you're trying to sell the car elsewhere, people are going to see what it is.
Particularly if you want to lie about it or say something that is untrue, that is shown to be untrue in the permanently existing Bring a Trailer listing.
Right.
That is now searchable with the VIN. I, as you know, was a history grad student when I got the job here. And so this idea of I know exactly what this car is and what it isn't. And I know I'm offending a tremendous number of power sellers who I really like when I say this, I think is complete BS, especially if the car's old. Nobody knows where a car was every day and what it did. And you could be the top mark expert and you just can't know. You can't, it's just, life is more gray than that. At least I believe this very firmly. And so I think being honest about that is good.
Mm-hmm. So what's your first phrase? What's your first one? Is it original paint?
We don't say it, and we have fights about
what's
that.
The one that
and what we always say is like show rather than say something. Show, right? Like always show. To your point about galleries being the inescapable fact of selling a car, like show the paint meter readings, show every part up close. The one that comes to my mind, this is like pivoting away from originality and paint, because we're moving into the restoration world. I mean, the word restoration in general is a whole nother podcast. We tend to use refurbishment or refresh, which like you can overuse that and it drives people crazy. The whole reason we stopped using restoration is in the early days of BAT. I can't remember if you were around for this, Beck. People used to litigate that and be like, this is not a restoration. Here's what qualifies as a restoration and what doesn't. That's like a squishy term. And you can never satisfy people. So then you move away from restoration because it's too controversial. And then people are like, now I hate refurbishment. Why won't you just stay restored? So it's damned if you do, damned if you don't.
And how old does a restoration have to be until it's no longer restored?
Totally.
Right? Restoration would happen 8 years ago. Is it still
I love
restored?
these 30s cars. They've been restored many times, a lot of times. Or it's a 70-year-old restoration. And so it's almost like it hasn't been restored. Yeah, totally. Honestly, years of iterating and changing and tweaking our editing style. I would say sometimes when it's controversial with a seller, I'll be like, great, let's not use any word to describe the work that was done. And let's just list the work that was, you know what I mean? Like to your point about journalism, just the facts, right? It was repainted. The engine was rebuilt. The brakes were changed. The interior was reupholstered. Like just list the work and don't try to put a label on it. Anyway, that being said, my least favorite phrase is probably nut and bolt restored.
Oh, yes.
I know I'm diving right into the deep end with that one. I hate it with a passion.
Wait, what's worse? What's worse, nut and bolt or frame off?
Frame off is probably worse because I don't know what it means. Like people say it for cars that are unibody, which is like my favorite, where it's like there is no frame to take off. I really dislike frame off, but you can kind of see what people mean. They mean the car was like kind of disassembled.
There's a bit of a binary.
Right.
Either the body was removed off the frame or it was not. I get that. But nut and bolt
doesn't make any freaking sense. Did you restore the nuts and bolts? Like, I really don't know what it means. You can literally see that it was invented by people trying to sell cars for more than they're worth. Do you know what I mean? It's like a made up phrase.
I definitely, when I was, quote, restoring, which I never did, on my old 2002, which I sold on the site, I took all the nuts and bolts off the suspension, got them replated in the East Bay.
Yes, it's the thing you can do.
Put them back on the car.
Wire. I've seen you can wire.
Oh, I did that too.
You can run them through a, what do you call it? The thing that
the dye.
The dye that cleans up the threads. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I did all of that. And honestly, most of it I did it because I didn't know where to get the right bolts and and everything, the right
There is also like, there is some zen to it. Like I miss working on cars a little bit, right? Like if that's your real passion, like it doesn't matter how many hours it takes.
You just got to get Felix to start, running bolts through dies.
Yeah, I need to get him doing his homework first. So let's hope my wife doesn't listen to this one. So that's probably my number one. What about you? Did you write down a few? I have a long list of painful ones here, but what do you got?
I've got a little list here.
I know those ones bug you too, right?
Oh, completely.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, it's because it's meaningless. Nut and bolt doesn't get offered to me a lot.
Okay. By the way, people have gotten a lot more comfortable with Bring a Trailer's straightforward description. It used to be you and I, we had to fight on this stuff all the time.
100%.
Yeah.
And a huge thing I noticed probably in the last 2 years for some behind the scenes for folks, when we have all the photos, all the videos, all the information, we draft a preview of the auction for the seller to approve. Because at the end of the day, it's their auction.
It's their listing, right.
And so if they want a different photo used, or if they think that our language is too conservative or too whatever, we will work with them to massage it to a point in which all parties are
or explain
agreeable.
Why it behooves them to,
And so then they click approve on that. And we call that internally seller changes. If that listings and seller changes, it's because a seller has requested changes on their listing and we're working on it right now. I have found in the last 2 years that has taken a nosedive. The number of sellers who have asked for changes on their listing preview. Whereas 5, 6, 7 years ago, it was a battle.
Yeah.
And I think it's because we were working against everyone's preconceived
against the norms
of the industry.
Mm-hmm.
And we've helped reset that. And probably the best example of that is all the other auction websites online that have
now
used
sound,
some very similar
I remember
language.
the first Craigslist ads would pop up and bring I'm like, oh my God, that reads just like the way we write our listings. And it was people kind of copying our style, sometimes literally copying and pasting a car that had already sold on BAT, but it was both kind of affirming, but also, I don't know if I ever told you this, I used to have fear around it because to me, this is one of our great trademarks, and people as fancy as Bruce Meyer have complimented our very straightforward, earnest, transparent delivery style. And I was afraid that like other people, like this was when competitors used to really frighten me, or potential competitors even. And I was worried that people would figure out that this was part of the secret sauce and start copying us. And We're 11 years in and people still don't want that's how deeply ingrained the kind of flowery puffery is in this industry. People still don't seem to get it.
It's not the style in the end, right? It's the ethics and the judgment
Correct.
that defined the style, which is why the style can change.
It's the intellectuality behind it. Yeah, we're always tweaking it. By the way, read a listing from 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and they're very different.
They're very different in setup in what we're willing to say, what we're not willing to say in both regards. It constantly changes.
Correct. And especially when volume came, we got too formulaic with the way we wrote things. So we're really trying to tweak that again too. There's humans at every step of the process in BAT, which I don't know that everyone always knows. We really think a robot's doing it or something. It's not. And it's amazing that 100 humans can sound so consistent and sound like they're the same, but they're not, I promise you. But yeah, we're always trying to do better, I should say. We never want to rest on our laurels. There's always a way to do it better without compromising those ethics that you're talking about. Absolutely. Or the intention behind why we do things the way we do.
Yeah, you just have to have some core principles and keep those aligned. All right, my phrase that comes up that always frustrates me, cringes with a little bit, is fully documented.
Ugh. What does it mean?
What does it mean? When is it full?
What if you are missing one oil change receipt? Right. Is it no longer fully documented? Semi-fully documented?
Semi-fully documented. It's documented from this decade, but not the previous one.
Yeah.
I get that. Fully documented restoration. Okay, great. What do you have? And then it turns out what they mean is they have some photos from it.
Yeah. Or it's like
invoices.
4 receipts from Pet Book.
Fully documented.
Yeah. Adjectives in general are kind of bad. Whenever you hear fully anything, that's not good.
It's the absoluteness that if something is fully done, something is completely restored. All of that leads to less trust.
Yep.
Right? Whenever you have to add that adjective ahead of it to try and add some sort of severity to it, I think that people...
You'd rather say there's 100 pages, 100 receipts, and 100 photos from the restoration.
And I do that in, for example, listing descriptions, or also in comments like today, I specifically said 80 more photos of paint depth meter readings have been added to the gallery.
Correct.
Add a number to it. Right.
Facts.
And for some people, that's a lot. For some people, that's not enough.
Right.
And that's fine. That's for them to make that judgment. It's not for us to say that a ton of photos have been added. That doesn't make any sense.
Can I riff on the fully documented thing?
Please.
I feel like I haven't heard this in a while, but I've definitely heard it numerous times over the years, which is we know where this car was every day of its life. I have issues with just kind of like
life with cars.
Yes. I don't like it when people are, carburetors are breathing and exhausts are exhaling, like the car is like slowly turning into
I kind of like that in the listing description.
All right. Bit. That's fair enough.
It breathes through
and exhales through. Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. It's artificially respirated. All of that is whatever. That's to the taste of the person reading it. Anthropomorphization. Yes, that's the right word. But I don't like it's never implied. It's always an insistence that we know where the car was. And it's like, we don't.
We don't.
We don't. Even if you were if you were the original owner and you never let anyone else take it anywhere and you never took it to a shop and left it, like you sat next to it when it was not in your garage, I guess but like that's the people making that claim are almost always a flipper or a dealer who's had the car for a couple months at most, sometimes days only. And it's related to that thing. And they're like, well, it's fully documented. And then you look it up and there may be hundreds of receipts, but it's like, okay, they start in 1994 and this car was built in the 60s. You know what I mean? So like there's a couple decades of missing information, right? And then it's all stories. And actually stories are great. And we're willing to put stories into listings, but we need to make clear that it's a story, right? There's no proof of it often.
In the listing that we were talking about earlier, the one that had the paint meter reading issues, there's now debate in the comments of, well, those repairs are pretty minor. They probably were port repairs, like done at the port when the car came over from Europe.
That's baloney too.
And it's like, how do you know that? And then second, now you're talking about like, well, then when does the life begin?
I know.
Which is a whole other discussion.
We're talking, totally. I mean, there's all of these are potential rabbit holes. And like, maybe we've been unfair to sellers. Like, to be totally fair, like the reason transparency on day one and being as honest about what you know and what you don't know about the car is so important is because as soon as you give anyone a reason to doubt you, the infamous peanut gallery is going to jump all over that. And now people are throwing often unfair criticisms at a car because the seller has made it seem like they're not to be trusted or like there's a gap in history. Now it's time to speculate, which, by the way, I dislike as much, if not even more, than untruthfulness about the car to start with, right? You just don't want to feed that.
And this happens everywhere. It's not just, obviously, some people complain to us about commenters on BAT, but any kind of forum, any car show that you're at as well.
At a freaking tentpole auction, dude. Like all the whispers in the crowd are about, oh, that car is not what people say it is. You know what I mean? Like it exists everywhere.
And people are looking to demonstrate their knowledge, right? They've acquired this knowledge over decades and decades. They've read the books. They've been friends. They've restored cars in the past. And they're eager. I get caught up in this all the time.
It's a compliment, right? They're obsessed with that maker model.
Yes, absolutely.
Right?
And sometimes people complain about it. My response often is, that's because you're holding this car up to such regard.
Yes.
They want to start debating it. When you're making grand claims without hedging language that you're open to it. And even if they do combat you, just say, great, thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
And that's that humility and that positivity that I find will actually diffuse an argument in the comments
100%.
So quickly.
And you'll almost always find somebody else who's another make and mark expert who's going to...
Correct. Give it some time and somebody else comes out and becomes a bandwagoner for you as well.
One of the other things I think about just historical context wise, the kind of way that collectible vehicles have turned into these almost, I don't know if art piece is the right word, but what did you go? These objects of collection, right? Where people don't even necessarily want to drive them or use them the way they were intended. Assets, right? Is that you kind of lose touch with what they were intended to be originally. Even these cars that are now, $50 million plus, they're intended to be race cars or to be used. And they were built in little shop where imperfections were kind of normal. Like every Ferrari 250 GTO, from what I understand, is like its own thing. They're kind of handmade. So it's hard to insist that anything was a certain way. There's kind of a presentism involved with, over restoring cars and then certain makes and models being so revered and so many people knowing so much about them that you forget that that's not what they were when they were new.
And I remember that this happened for me coming into BAT. I was one of those people who had pigeonholed myself into one make because I hadn't had a lot of experience as a child. I didn't grow up like in a car family really per se, that I hadn't really experienced hot rods and American cars and all these other things, that I had acquired this base knowledge and I valued myself off of the contribution that I could provide from one small sliver of car culture. And I found so much more enjoyment opening myself up to it. But the more you learn you don't actually know.
100%.
And that's a great feeling to have. But I think
that's true of any endeavor,
completely,
by the way. Yeah.
For sure. And I think part of that fear is getting over that ledge, the point in which you're now like, oh, I'm okay with not the smartest person in the room for that one topic.
Yep.
And I'm actually having a better time having dabbled in all these different things.
Way to bring it back to your original point, Beck. Good. That's good podcasting. I do think, though, when you do go into different nuanced subcultures of the car world, some of the trends remain true. Like there are people who consider themselves an expert no matter where you go. And I agree with you. I love being comfortable being like, I'm not the person who knows the most about this, right? Like you just can't. Also, like, God, I thought I knew a lot about cars before I worked here. I guess I did. I don't know. It's hard for me to even know. I certainly know a lot more now, but boy, I don't feel like an expert about anything.
Well, and when you're younger, you enjoy the positive attributes of being a quote expert. And then when you get older, I find myself enjoying being around people who know more than I do.
Yes.
I feel like then I get to be in the room.
Oh, totally.
And I feel that all the time. When I'm with you and Zach and Howard, I'm just like, I'm learning so much every single time because there's such a base knowledge that is so far beyond myself. And that wasn't the case when I was younger and less experienced. I thought that like I had an advantage or I had a power play. But it's so helpful to be in those comments with your listing being open to the experts to come in, which actually was one of my phrases, was just the concept of expertise and the expert of just people coming in and saying, well, this expert says XYZ. They issued out this certification and thus it means this. Like, well, no, it means maybe that they saw it and that they liked it, but it still doesn't say that the car is original. What
experts are wrong. Sometimes they're even defrocked as experts, which is fascinating, right? It's tough, man. I still suffer from, know-it-allism, as you know, and maybe you've matured more than I have. But the older I get, the more I realize how much I don't know and how important it is to listen to others. And I mean, sitting across from Magnus Walker and listening to him rattle off all the VINs of the 911s he's owned, and he knows what the VIN means in terms of the year. I mean, like, I love Porsches and I'm never going to get there. You know what I mean? But then compare what I know or about Porsches to a casual Porsche person. And also, by the way, the car world in general is almost meaningless to the average human on Earth.
Completely.
And there's so many little bits inside of it. Anyway, any other painful phrases you want to go over?
Anything involving odometers. Just anything.
But that's the history thing. There are so many more odometers are inaccurate than people want to give credit for.
So the whole value add of the odometer comes back to the concept of original paint.
Yeah.
Which is people are afraid
known history.
They're afraid of the history. Right? They're afraid of the unknown history. And the odometer argument is purely except for, there's one exception for this that I'll bring up. The odometer is what I tell a lot of sellers. It's only a quantifiable estimation of condition.
Yeah.
So if you were to look at a 20,000 mile car and a 60,000 mile car and you couldn't look at them, you would assume the 20,000 mile car is in better condition than the 60,000 mile car. Doesn't mean that that's true, but if you had to, that's some evidence.
Yeah.
And that does sometimes then add to evaluation separation when cars come to market.
Can also add to controversy, though. That doesn't look like a 60,000 mile. That doesn't look like a 20,000 mile.
At the end of the day, condition trumps odometers. 100%. We've seen that before. We've seen cars with the exact same features. Ford GTs are probably the best example of this, where at a certain point, the odometer doesn't matter as much as the condition of the car because there's so few variables. There's only, 4 options of the ones people talk about.
Have low miles.
Right, most of them low miles. And so condition trumps everything. Odometer is really just a quantifiable estimation of condition. One exception is when people are literally buying the odometer reading. And that's when we're getting into like the crazy ultra.
But those cars often don't even run sometimes, right? Or they're not going to be driven, right? Like we had the GNXs, which are back at that.
I wrote the 8 mile GNX listing from years ago.
I remember Howard making jokes. You're a single digit guy? Because like there's a guy with the 14 mile GNX. But none of those cars are even going to be, you can't drive them a foot. Right? Like you can't afford to drive them 1 inch, basically, right?
And then there's just the issue of the value that's sunk into it. But that's the thing is people are buying that odometer. So that works in a different world because people are buying it for different reasons. They're not buying it for condition anymore. Yeah. That car might actually be in worse condition and they're kind of okay with it. What they want is
we've seen some of those low mileage cars that have kind of worn driver's seats because like they were in a showroom and 1,000 people sat in them over the years, right? Sliding in and out of that driver's seat, even though the car was never started.
Worn driver's seat or the plastic covering that was covering the seat started to dematerialize and it actually sort of stains
the seat. Yeah,
right.
Correct.
Like you can't, that plastic's not meant to sit on there forever. It's meant to protect it for like the 1 week
for when it's on the transporter. Yeah, totally. Fascinating. I'm curious what you think about this. I've evolved on that too. I used to be one of those people who was like, oh, what a waste. It should have been driven. And now I'm like, man, it's a collector car. I don't care. If you just like to stare at it and look at it, I'm fine with that. It's not for me, but who am I to say whether somebody else should appreciate a car just for aesthetics?
2 things. Whenever there's a car that's low miles and people are complaining about it in the comments, I'm talking like,
what a shame. It's like the first comment every time.
Is my argument is great. Here's your opportunity to buy that car new.
Yeah, right.
Go do it. Go buy it and drive it. This person put in all the effort. They're going to lose money on this investment probably had they taken that money and invested it elsewhere. So here's your opportunity to buy it. The second one is
which nobody ever does.
Which they might not do. The other one is one thing I've experienced in listing cars through our white glove program. I've had the privilege of meeting some very successful people with large car collections. There are people out there who are an echelon of wealth such that the value of their car is the equivalent that my Hot Wheels car that I bought is to me. And thus, yes, I'm not a child. I don't move my Hot Wheels anywhere, but I have a small collection of them. And my wealth compared to the cost of that Hot Wheel is essentially the same for them in those cars. And to them, that's the enjoyment they're getting from it. And thus, it's just a non-issue for them.
Which I'm fine with it. Again, we were talking about the breadth of the car world. And it's like, let people like what they like.
It's all over the place.
When I was younger, this is the last thing I'll say, but on the same topic of needing to know more than other people. When I was younger, I remember being like, no, these are the kinds of movies you need to like. This is the kind of music you need to like if you're going to be a cool person I always wanted to be perceived as a smart person. And the older I get, the more I realize that's, I was never going to get there, right? I'm not the dumbest guy in the world, but I'm certainly not the smartest. So I used to have very strong opinions about what you should like and shouldn't like. And I remember in my mid to late 20s, a buddy of mine who I worked with at the engineering firm where we built UAVs was like, let people like what they like, man. And he's totally, I think about it almost every day, right? Like if you're in this hobby, bless you, welcome, and you get to like whatever you like. And then I want the freedom to like whatever I like without people telling me that I'm wrong. You know what I mean?
That knowledge base is something that we kind of have to not associate always with being an expert, because that knowledge base is stuff that's going to become ubiquitous and available to everyone. Right. Eventually, especially more with AI, but more just
people
with
know
access
more and
to
more,
information.
100%.
Whereas ethics and judgment in the end is what's going to become the deciding factor.
And robots don't have that.
Yet.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Good call. Great place to end. Nice and ominous. Well done. Thanks for doing this, Beck. This is a great discussion. I feel like we could go forever on this one. Any other thing before we end? See you in Palm Springs. I'm excited about that. We're going to get our kids together, hang out in Palm Springs, and do some swimming in a couple weeks.
That's going to be amazing. I'm super
What car are you taking?
Probably the Golf.
Oh, interesting.
The Golf is best for car trips, for long distance car trips. Car roof box on top. I was
Yeah,
planning
you
on
said you're going to cannonball it. You're not going to fly and rent.
No, we're gonna drive the whole way.
One full trip both ways.
That's sort of the plan.
I'm scared for you. Don't stop in Bakersfield. We stopped in Bakersfield on our way down last summer because my wife and son really wanted to see it. And I was like, I grew up there, guys. I don't think you do. And then I took them against my better judgment. And they were like, ugh. And I'm like, yeah, I told you.
My son is struggling to make it on road trips without getting car sick right now. So we'll see what we're going to do with this one. But
a couple stops. Harris Ranch, maybe Bakersfield, Gorman. You'll have fun.
Can I put out a shout out for the BT merch store? We just added a bunch of items on there that are so awesome.
We can give Tabitha and Connor their due because they did all that, along with help from other people, Fernie and Ben and Emily. But really good, right?
Awesome stuff. The new BAT Hot Rod collectible car is on there, as well as the jacket sweatshirt. I think that jacket design is amazing. Keeping them honest. I love it.
Yep. That's right. That's our discussion today.
It is.
God, more perfect tie-ins, Beck. You're a master. Thanks, buddy, for doing this.
Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, everybody, for listening. Hope you enjoyed this one. We're always open to feedback, to tips, to suggestions, to critiques. Tell us why we're wrong about being honest. Happy to hear defense of dishonesty.
Or if you think we're not honest.
Yeah, totally. So defensive dishonesty to podcast@bringatrailer.com. We'll make sure to read that one on the air next time we record. Thanks as always for listening, and we'll catch you next time.